All right, so let's go over the answers to this final section. All right, so the argument we have here is an argument from David Hume, who is a Scottish philosopher. He gives the argument, says this: the table that we see seems to diminish as we move further away from it, but the real table, which exists independently of us, does not change its size as we move away from it. Therefore, we do not see the real table, but only an image of the table. So the first thing to note is we clearly we have what the conclusion is. It's right after a therefore. We do not see the real table, but only the image. So let's see what his premises are. So there seem to be two statements he makes, which is he's distinguishing the table we see and the real table. So the first premise is that the table we see diminishes in size as we move away from it. So you start walking backwards from the table and the table gets smaller. But the real table does not diminish in size. It stays the same exact size. So the hidden premise, or what seems to be implied, so why he thinks these two sentences imply the fourth one, is something like this: that if two things have different properties, then they are different things, or they can't be the same thing. So if you have one thing that's blue and one that's white, they can't be the same thing because they have different facts about them. They have different properties. So since the table we see has the property get smaller as we move away, but the real table has the property of staying the same size as we move away, then the table we see must not be the real table. They must be different things. So that's the basic form of Hume's argument. So it's a good example of finding where there's a hidden premise in there, and it's good to sort of read charitably and try and figure out what Hume might be thinking, why he thinks these first two premises imply the conclusion, and sort of they're tied together by this hidden premise. Okay. The second argument comes from Augustine. So he says that everyone who does evil is the cause of his own evil doing. If you remember this, remember that evil deeds are punished by the justice of God. They would not be punished justly if they had not been done voluntarily. Right. So this is a good argument to look at for two reasons. So one, as opposed to the one from Hume, Augustine gives his conclusion right at the beginning. So he's going to state his conclusion and then give his reasoning for it. Whereas some philosophers will give their reasoning and then sort of finish with giving their conclusion. So his conclusion is that everyone who does evil is the cause of his own evil doing, or he states it elsewhere as sort of like does it voluntarily or does it by free will. Right. So he gets there through a modus tollens argument. So the other reason why it's useful to note this is that he has an if-then statement, but it really is sort of a then-if statement because the if comes partway through. So he says they would not be punished justly if they had not been done voluntarily. So this is the first premise of the argument. What he's saying is, if they had not been done voluntarily, then they would not be punished justly. So I formalize it this way: if the evil deeds had not been done voluntarily, then they would not be punished justly by God. So he says, look, this is the basic notion of free will and moral responsibility. That sort of, you're only morally responsible for the things that you do freely. If you didn't do them freely, then God would be unjust in punishing you for that. But he notes in the second sentence here, he says, remember that evil deeds are punished by the justice of God. That evil deeds, they are punished justly by God. So, if evil deeds had not been done voluntarily, they would not be punished justly by God. But evil deeds are punished justly by God. Therefore, the evil deeds are done voluntarily. So this is a great example of a modus tollens type of argument. So the form is valid. It's a valid form of argument. So if you disagree with the conclusion, which we'll look later when we get into free will, with one person who disagrees with that conclusion, that evil deeds are done voluntarily, then you have to deny one of these two premises in Augustine's argument. Okay, so quickly I was going to talk about these last two, which are a bit longer. So number 3 here is a long argument that comes from C.S. Lewis. Number 4 is an argument that comes from Thomas Aquinas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it off here and give you some time to sort of look through these. And If anyone wants to attempt to formalize these arguments, they're actually sort of not as difficult as they might look, but it's just sort of doing some weeding through it. Look for the if-then statements. Make sure that the formalization just is the skeleton of the argument. You just want the basic logic of the argument. You don't need to give all the reasons that the authors provide for why they think the premises are true. Just give me the basic premises of the argument. If you think you have a good formalization of the argument, email me with your answers to that. And I'm going to be pretty stickler on it, but if you get them, I'll give 1 point of extra credit for each one that you get correct. So email that to me, let's say before Thursday at 6 o'clock when your second set of reading questions are due. If you get them to me before then, you can get some extra credit points. And then I'll probably post a little bit of an explanation with the actual answers to it after then, so that you guys can see what the answers are to them then. So if you have any questions about the logic, please ask. This is important stuff that you guys need to make sure you're getting down. So feel free to email me, post in the discussion board, or meet with me in office hours. I'm happy to help on any of this stuff as we work through it on the semester. So have a good one.